You never think the person who built your world will be the one to hand you the match to burn it all down. You never imagine that the hands you held, the ones you thought would catch you if you fell, would be the very ones to push you off the ledge. My story isn't just about a broken heart. It's about a betrayal so deep it fractured my reality, and about an alliance so unexpected it gave me the strength to piece it back together. My life with Mark, it was everything I'd ever dreamed of. It was the kind of love story you see in movies, the kind that makes you believe in fate. We met in a crowded coffee shop, a complete cliché. He spilled a latte on my favorite book, and his apology was so charming, so genuinely horrified that I couldn't help but laugh. He had this smile that could disarm armies, and eyes that made you feel like you were the only person in the entire world. For 5 years, he was my world. We built a home together, not just with furniture and paint, but with shared dreams and inside jokes. We talked about a future filled with kids, a dog, and a little house with a garden. He was a successful project manager at a construction firm, ambitious and driven. I was a graphic designer working from home, and our lives meshed perfectly. He was the structured, logical one. I was the creative, free-spirited one. We balanced each other out. But the cornerstone of our relationship, the part that made me feel the most secure, was his family. Specifically, his mother, Eleanor. Eleanor wasn't the stereotypical monster-in-law you hear horror stories about. From the day Mark introduced us, she welcomed me with an open heart. She was a woman of quiet strength and immense grace. A retired history professor, she was intelligent, warm, and had a way of listening that made you feel truly heard. We bonded instantly over a shared love for classic literature and gardening. On weekends, I'd go over to her house, and we'd spend hours tending to her roses, our hands covered in dirt, sharing stories. She told me she saw me as the daughter she never had, and I loved her like a second mother. She would often say, "Clara, you've brought out the best in my son. I've never seen him so happy, so settled." And I believed her, because I saw it too. Mark was attentive, loving, and thoughtful. He'd leave little notes for me around the house, bring me my favorite flowers for no reason, and plan elaborate date nights. He was, by all accounts, the perfect partner. Looking back, it's terrifying how convincing a lie can be when you want to believe it. The signs were there, of course, they always are, but they were like whispers in a hurricane, so easy to ignore. A phone call he'd take in the other room, an excuse about a late meeting that felt just a little too vague. A new expensive watch he claimed was a bonus from work. I'd feel a tiny flicker of suspicion, a cold knot in my stomach, but I'd quickly push it down. Why would I doubt this perfect life? I had everything I ever wanted. To question it felt like an act of self-sabotage. I remember one evening, about 6 months before everything fell apart, we were having dinner at Eleanor's house. Mark was on his phone more than usual, a distracted smile plastered on his face as he texted under the table. Eleanor noticed it. I saw her gaze linger on him, a subtle frown line appearing between her brows. Later, as I helped her with the dishes, she asked me, "Is everything all right with Mark, dear? He seems distant." I forced a bright smile. "Oh, he's just swamped with that new downtown project. He's been under a lot of pressure." Eleanor just nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. She dried a plate with meticulous care and said, "Pressure reveals character, Clara, it doesn't create it." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. I didn't understand their full weight then, but I would soon. That was the first thread. The first tiny pull on the beautiful tapestry we had woven, a warning that soon it would all begin to unravel. I was living in a masterpiece of deception, and the artist was the man sleeping next to me every night. And the only other person who suspected the paint was fake was his own mother. The shift was gradual at first, almost imperceptible. It wasn't one big event, but a series of small, unsettling changes. It started with his phone. That little glowing rectangle, which used to be a non-issue, suddenly became a fortress. It was always face down on the table, always angled away from me. He'd added a new, complex passcode, and I once saw him flinch when I picked it up to move it. "Just being more careful about security," he'd said with a casual shrug. Work stuff. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The downtown project became his go-to excuse for everything. Dinners I'd cooked would go cold on the table. Plans we'd made would be canceled at the last minute with a rushed text message. "So sorry, babe, buried in paperwork. Rain check soon, I promise." The promises piled up unfulfilled. I tried to be the supportive partner. I'd tell myself that this was just a stressful period for him, that his ambition was one of the things I loved about him. I'd pack him a lunch, send him encouraging texts, and try not to complain. But a cold, creeping dread was starting to settle in my bones. The man I loved was becoming a stranger. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by a guarded, distant look. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and depth, became superficial, like two acquaintances catching up. The breaking point for my denial came on our 5th anniversary. I had planned a special evening. I booked a table at the restaurant where we had our first date, bought a new dress, and spent the whole day filled with a nervous excitement, hoping this night could rekindle the spark we seemed to be losing. He was supposed to be home by 6. At 6:30, I got a text. "Running late, huge issue at the site, start without me if you have to." My heart sank. I texted back, "Everything okay? It's our anniversary, Mark." No reply. I sat there in my new dress, the restaurant reservation ticking away. 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. At 9, my phone finally buzzed. It was him. "So sorry, Clara, completely exhausted, just got home. I'll make it up to you, I swear." I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just felt empty. The anger and the hurt were so immense they created a vacuum inside me. I drove home in a haze, the beautiful night I had imagined mocking me. When I walked in, he was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. The house was dark and silent, except for the faint glow of his phone on the nightstand. The next morning, he tried to apologize with flowers and a rehearsed speech about deadlines and demanding clients. I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to go back to the way things were, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally broken. A few days later, while doing laundry, a receipt fell out of his jeans pocket. It wasn't for building supplies or office equipment. It was from a high-end jewelry store dated the day of our anniversary. The item purchased was a delicate gold necklace with a single sapphire. It wasn't for me. My birthday had passed months ago, and he'd given me a bracelet. I stood there in the laundry room, the crumpled piece of paper in my hand feeling like a block of ice. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A gift for his mother, a client, but the date, our anniversary, it felt too deliberate. It felt like a betrayal. I decided to talk to a leaner. I didn't want to accuse Mark, not yet. I just needed to talk to someone who knew him, someone who could maybe offer a rational explanation that I was too emotional to see. I went to her house that afternoon, the receipt tucked into my purse like a guilty secret. She welcomed me with her usual warm hug, but she must have seen the turmoil on my face. "Clara, what's wrong? You look pale." We sat in her sunroom, surrounded by her beautiful plants. With trembling hands, I pulled out the receipt and told her everything. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the missed anniversary, and now this. I expected her to defend him, to come up with excuses for her son. Instead, she looked at the receipt and her face hardened. A deep, profound sadness filled her eyes. It wasn't surprise, it was recognition. She looked at me and her voice was barely a whisper. "I was afraid of this," she said, her gaze not leaving mine. "He has a pattern, Clara, a history. I had so hoped you had changed him, that he had finally grown up." In that moment, she didn't just confirm my fears, she gave them a name. A history, a pattern. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time slip-up due to stress. This was who he was, and his own mother knew it. The betrayal wasn't just his. It felt like the whole family had been keeping a secret, hoping I wouldn't find out. The foundation of my world didn't just crack, it shattered. Alina's words echoed in my head for days. A pattern, a history. It was like she had handed me a new lens through which to view the last 5 years of my life. Every forgotten promise, every flimsy excuse, every moment of distance, it all clicked into place. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being naive. The sadness I felt was quickly being consumed by a cold, burning anger. Anger at Mark for his deception, but also at myself for being so blind. How could I have ignored so many signs? How could I have built my entire future on such a faulty foundation? I needed proof, concrete, undeniable proof. I couldn't confront him with just a receipt and a mother's vague warning. He was a master of manipulation. He would twist it, turn it back on me, and make me feel like I was the crazy one. I needed something he couldn't talk his way out of. Technology is a strange thing. It connects us, but it also creates a digital trail of our lives, our secrets. We had a shared family plan for our phones, and with a heavy heart and a trembling hand, I logged into the account online. I looked at the call logs. For months, there was one number that appeared over and over, dozens of calls a day. Late-night texts that went on for hours, a number I didn't recognize. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, but I saved the number to my contacts under a random name, Service Center, and opened my messaging app. A profile picture popped up. A woman with bright blonde hair and a dazzling smile posing on a beach. My heart stopped. I recognized her. Her name was Jessica. She was a junior architect at Mark's firm, someone he'd mentioned in passing as a talented kid, a real go-getter. He wasn't just having an affair. He was having it with a colleague under everyone's noses. The late nights at the office suddenly took on a sickening new meaning. But that wasn't the worst of it. We had a joint savings account, the one we were using to save for a down payment on a house, our dream fund. I logged into our online banking, a pit of dread forming in my stomach. I scrolled through the transaction history, and there it was, dozens of withdrawals over the past year. Not huge amounts, but hundreds of dollars here and there, small enough to go unnoticed if you weren't looking closely. Transfers to a credit card I didn't recognize. Payments for fancy restaurants I'd never been to. A charge from a boutique hotel on the other side of town on the night of our anniversary. He wasn't just betraying my heart, he was stealing from our future. He was funding his secret life with the money we were saving together, money I had worked hard for. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't a simple act of infidelity. This was a calculated, long-term campaign of lies and theft. That night, I couldn't wait any longer. When he came home, whistling a cheerful tune as he walked through the door, something inside me snapped. I was standing in the living room, the bank statement and the jewelry receipt laid out on the coffee table. He saw my face, saw the papers on the table, and his cheerful mask fell away. For a second, I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes before it was replaced by a cold defensiveness. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice tight. "I think you know, Mark," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. "The jewelry, the hotel, the money are money." What happened next was a masterclass in gaslighting. He denied everything. The necklace was a corporate gift. The hotel was for a client meeting that ran late. The money transfers were for project expenses. He hadn't had time to file for reimbursement. He threw lie after lie at me, each one more ridiculous than the last. When he saw I wasn't buying it, his tone shifted. He became angry, turning the tables on me. "I can't believe you're snooping through my things, Clara. Spying on me? What happened to trust? After everything I do for us, this is the thanks I get. You're being paranoid." He was shouting now, his face red with fury. He was trying to make me the villain, to make me feel ashamed for uncovering his disgusting secrets. And in that moment, seeing the man I loved transform into this cornered, vicious stranger, I knew for certain there was nothing left to save. The Mark I thought I knew never really existed. He was an illusion, and the illusion was gone. "Get out," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Oh, what?" "Get out of my house." He stared at me, shocked that I wasn't backing down. He scoffed, grabbed his keys, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence he left behind was deafening. I sank to the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, and I finally allowed myself to break. The tears came hot and furious, not tears of sadness, but of rage. He didn't just break my heart. He tried to break my spirit. He tried to make me believe I was crazy. He wouldn't get away with it. He couldn't. The days that followed were a blur of grief and anger. I moved through my house like a ghost, the silence amplifying the echo of Mark's betrayal. Every object held a memory, now tainted. The couch where we'd cuddled, the kitchen where we'd cooked together, the bed we'd shared, it was all a crime scene. He tried to call, to text, sending messages that swung wildly between feigned remorse and angry accusations. "You're overreacting," one text read. Another said, "I miss you. Can we please just talk about this like adults?" He was trying to crawl back in to smooth things over with empty words, assuming I would eventually break down and forgive him like I always had before. But something was different this time. The part of me that made excuses for him was gone, burned away by the truth. About a week after he left, there was a knock on the door. It was Alina. She stood on my porch, her face etched with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. She held a casserole dish in her hands, a peace offering. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she said softly, "but I couldn't stay away. I had to know you were okay." I let her in. I was too exhausted to pretend anymore. I told her everything that had happened since our last talk. The phone records, Jessica, the stolen money from our savings, the ugly confrontation. As I spoke, I watched her expression change from sadness to a quiet, simmering fury. She wasn't angry with me for discovering the truth. She was furious with her son for creating it. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Then she looked at me, and her eyes were like steel. "He did this before," she said, her voice low and firm. "Not like this, not on this scale, but the lies, the deception, it's a darkness in him I've watched grow for years. His father was the same way. I think Mark learned it from him. I divorced his father for it. I told myself Mark would be different. I was a fool." She confessed that Mark had a history of infidelity in past relationships, which she had always hoped were just youthful mistakes. He had a way of convincing everyone, including her, that he had changed. She admitted she'd had a suspicion for months, but confronting him always ended in him twisting the situation, making her feel like a meddling mother. "He doesn't just lie to you, Clara," she continued, her voice trembling with a controlled rage. "He lies to everyone. He's built his entire career, his entire life on a foundation of half-truths and manipulations. He has a secret credit card I know about. He has investments he's never told anyone about. He presents himself as this successful, self-made man, but so much of it is an illusion." Hearing this, something shifted inside me. My despair began to curdle into determination. This wasn't just about a cheating ex-boyfriend anymore. This was about a man who systematically deceived and used the people who loved him. He hadn't just hurt me, he'd hurt his own mother, and who knew how many others. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he could just walk away and leave me with the emotional and financial wreckage. "He can't get away with this, Alina," I said, the words feeling powerful on my tongue. "He can't just move on to the next person and do this all over again." Alina looked at me, a fierce light in her eyes. "No," she said, "he can't." And that was the moment the alliance was forged. In that quiet living room, amidst my shattered dreams, a plan began to take shape. It wasn't born from a desire for petty revenge, but from a need for justice. We weren't going to scream or cry or break his things. We were going to do something far more devastating. We were going to dismantle his carefully constructed world of lies by using the one thing he couldn't defend against: the truth. "He is my son," Alina said, her voice filled with a painful resolve. "And it is my responsibility to stop him from causing any more harm. He thinks his greatest strength is his charm, his ability to lie. But his greatest weakness is his pride. His reputation, that's what we'll target. We will expose him, Clara. Not just to you, but to everyone he has ever fooled." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was steady and strong. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a survivor, and I wasn't alone. I had the most unlikely and most powerful ally I could have ever asked for, the mother of the man who broke my heart. The game had changed. We weren't just going to get even. We were going to get justice. The next few weeks were a quiet storm of activity. Alina and I became co-conspirators, strategists in a war Mark didn't even know was being waged. My grief was channeled into a laser-focused mission. Every piece of evidence we gathered was another brick in the wall of his downfall. Our headquarters was Alina's cozy sunroom. Over countless cups of tea, we mapped out our plan. Alina's knowledge of her son was our greatest asset. She knew his habits, his secrets, his weaknesses. She knew where he kept his important documents, the passwords he was likely to use, and the lies he had told his family over the years. Mark is arrogant, she explained one afternoon as we sorted through papers. He believes he's smarter than everyone else, which makes him sloppy. He won't expect us to be this organized. Our first step was to gather irrefutable proof of his financial deception. Alina remembered that Mark kept a box of old financial statements in the attic of her home from before he'd moved in with me. We spent an entire Saturday up there, dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light from the window, and we found it. A shoebox filled with statements for a credit card and a secret investment account under his name only. The statements told a story of lavish spending that went back years. Expensive dinners, weekend trips to cities he'd claimed he was visiting for work conferences, gifts from luxury brands. He had been living a double life long before he met me. More importantly, we found evidence that he had recently funneled a significant amount of money from our joint savings into this secret investment account, not just spending it but hiding it. He wasn't just planning an affair, he was planning an exit strategy. Next, we needed to understand the full scope of his relationship with Jessica. This was the part I dreaded, but I knew it was necessary. I had to know if she was a willing participant or another victim. I did something I never thought I'd do. I reached out to her. I found her on social media and sent a simple, non-threatening message. "Hi Jessica, my name is Clara. I was Mark's partner. I think we need to talk." To my surprise, she responded almost immediately. We met for coffee in a neutral place where no one would know us. She was nervous, defensive at first, but when I laid out my story, showing her the evidence of how long he'd been lying to me, her defensiveness crumbled. It turned out Mark had told her that he and I were on the verge of breaking up for months, that our relationship was basically over and he was just waiting for the right time to leave. He had sold her a completely different story. The expensive necklace. He told her it was a starting fresh gift for them. He had manipulated her just as thoroughly as he had manipulated me. By the end of our conversation, she was in tears. She wasn't my enemy, she was just the other side of the same coin. She agreed to help. She forwarded me emails and texts from him, messages that not only confirmed their affair but also contained details about him bad-mouthing clients and cutting corners on his big downtown project. The very project he was using as his alibi. Now we had it all: the financial deceit, the emotional manipulation, the professional misconduct. We had a complete portrait of the real Mark, not the charming man he pretended to be. The final piece of the plan was the stage. Where would we pull back the curtain? Alina came up with the perfect, most poetic idea. Mark's 35th birthday was in a month. Every year she hosted a big party for him at her house, inviting all his family, friends, and important colleagues. It was the highlight of his social calendar, a night where he got to be the center of attention, the successful son, the beloved friend. "This year will be no different," Alina said, a grim smile on her face. "I'll host the party, we'll invite everyone. His entire world will be in one room, and when it's time for the birthday toast, we will give him a celebration he will never, ever forget." The trap was set. All the evidence was compiled into a neat, undeniable package. I created a small, discreet presentation on a tablet, screenshots of bank transfers, text messages, emails from Jessica. A silent, devastating slideshow of his betrayal. Mark, in the meantime, had grown cocky. When I had my lawyer send him a formal letter to begin our separation, he responded with arrogance, claiming I was entitled to nothing. He assumed I was just a heartbroken woman acting out. He had no idea what was coming. He was walking with a smile on his face right into the carefully constructed web we had woven. And his own mother was the one holding all the strings. The night of the party arrived with an electric tension in the air. Alina's home, usually a place of warmth and comfort, felt like a stage set for a Greek tragedy. The garden was strung with fairy lights, music played softly, and guests mingled, laughing and sipping champagne. From the outside, it was a picture of celebration. But for me and Alina, every smiling face, every cheerful toast was just the prelude to the storm. I arrived with Alina, playing the part of the gracious, supportive friend of the family. A few people gave me looks of sympathy, assuming I was putting on a brave face after the breakup. Mark was already there, holding court in the center of the living room. He was glowing with self-satisfaction, dressed in an expensive suit, accepting compliments and birthday wishes. When he saw me, his eyes widened in surprise, but a smug smirk quickly replaced it. He probably thought my presence meant I was weakening, that I was there to try and win him back. He came over, his voice dripping with false concern. "Clara, I'm surprised to see you here," he said, loud enough for those around us to hear. "I'm glad you came. I hope we can still be civil." I just smiled, a calm, serene smile that seemed to unnerve him. "I wouldn't miss it, Mark. Happy birthday." I spent the next hour making my way through the crowd, speaking to his aunts, his cousins, his colleagues. I wasn't just making small talk, I was observing. I saw the way they all looked at him with such admiration. They saw the man he pretended to be, the successful son, the brilliant project manager, the loyal friend. They had no idea about the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. Jessica was there too. She had arrived with a few other colleagues from the firm. She and I exchanged a brief, knowing glance from across the room. We were two sides of a story about to converge. Finally, the moment came. Eleanor, with her trademark elegance, tapped a glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her as she stood near the fireplace, a picture of maternal pride. Mark stood beside her, beaming, ready to soak in the praise. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my son, Mark, on his 35th birthday," Eleanor began, her voice clear and steady. "A mother always hopes her son will grow up to be a man of character, a man of integrity, honesty, and kindness." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. She looked directly at Mark, and her smile was gone, replaced by an expression of profound disappointment. Mark's confident grin began to falter. He could sense the shift in her tone. "For a long time," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength, "I believed my son was that man. He built a life that looked perfect on the outside, a successful career, a beautiful home, a loving partner in Clara, a woman I am proud to call my family." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the typical birthday toast. But as I said earlier, pressure doesn't create character, it reveals it. And lately, my son has been under a lot of pressure, and it has revealed something ugly. Something I, as his mother, can no longer stand by and watch in silence. Mark's face had gone pale. He tried to interrupt, "Mom, what are you doing?" But she held up a hand, silencing him. "I'm doing what I should have done years ago. I'm telling the truth." That was my cue. I stepped forward, holding the tablet. I didn't say a word. I simply turned the screen towards Mark's closest family members, his uncle and aunt. On the screen was the first slide, a copy of the bank statement from our joint account with the transfers to his secret credit card highlighted in red. Eleanor's voice continued, narrating the evidence. It started with lies about money, stealing from the future he was supposedly building with Clara to fund a secret life. I swiped to the next slide, a screenshot of the hotel charge on their anniversary, then the receipt for the sapphire necklace. Gasps rippled through the room. "He betrayed the woman who loved him," Eleanor said, her voice laced with ice. "He did it on the very day they were meant to be celebrating their love." Mark was frozen, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. He looked from his mother to me, then to the shocked faces of his family and friends. His world was crumbling in real time, in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress. "And he didn't just lie to Clara," Eleanor said, her eyes finding Jessica in the crowd. "He lied to everyone. He manipulated a young colleague, telling her his relationship was over, drawing her into his web of deceit." I swiped again. This time it was a screenshot of a text message from Mark to Jessica, calling me unstable and clingy. Jessica looked at the floor, but I could see the vindication on her face. The final blow came from Eleanor. "And his professional life, it's just as fraudulent. He has been cutting corners on his big project, bad-mouthing the very clients who sing his praises here tonight and putting his company at risk." She was bluffing slightly on the risk part, but the emails from Jessica about his unprofessionalism were real. The room was in stunned silence. No one knew where to look. The man they had all admired just moments before was being systematically dismantled by his own mother. Mark finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate sound. "This is insane. She's a bitter ex-girlfriend, and my mother is just confused. They're making all of this up." But the evidence was too compelling. The look on my face, on Jessica's face, and most powerfully on his mother's face, it was undeniable. No one believed him. Elinor delivered the final line, her voice filled not with triumph, but with a deep, cutting sorrow. "The only liar in this room, Mark, is you. Happy birthday. I hope you finally learn what it means to be a man." She set her champagne glass down untouched. The party was over. The silence that followed Elinor's final words was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a silence filled with shattered illusions and dawning horror. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then one by one people started to leave. There were no goodbyes, no awkward consolations. They just quietly walked out, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and disgust. They didn't look at me or Elinor. They couldn't look at Mark. He stood there alone in the middle of the room, as his entire social and familial world evaporated around him. His uncle, a man who had been a mentor to him, walked past and just shook his head in profound disappointment. His colleagues from work, including his boss who had been there, gave him a wide berth, their expressions cold and professional. They had heard enough to know this was a massive liability. I watched him not with hatred but with a strange sense of detachment. The man who had held so much power over my emotions was now just a small, pathetic figure, exposed and powerless. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, searching for an ally, for someone to help him spin this, but there was nothing left. I just held his gaze, my expression blank, and then I turned and walked away. The aftermath was swift and devastating for him. The next day, he was suspended from his job pending an internal investigation. Jessica and a few others, now feeling empowered to speak up, reported his unprofessional behavior. He was fired within the week. His family, led by Elinor's unwavering stance, completely cut him off. They were ashamed not just of what he did, but of how long they had enabled his behavior by choosing to look the other way. He tried to fight back, of course. He sent me furious, rambling emails accusing me of ruining his life. He called Elinor, screaming at her for her betrayal. But it was like a toddler's tantrum. His words had no power anymore because they were no longer backed by the credibility he had lost. Legally, he had no leg to stand on. Faced with the undeniable proof of financial misconduct, his lawyer advised him to settle our separation quickly and quietly. I got back every cent he had taken from our joint account, plus a portion of his now frozen secret investments. I sold the house we had shared, purging the last physical remnants of his presence from my life. My own healing was a slow and quiet process. The revenge hadn't magically erased the pain or the scars of his betrayal. There were still days when a wave of sadness would wash over me, a phantom limb of a life I thought I would have. But what the revenge did do was give me closure. It gave me a sense of justice. It proved that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts were right, and that I had the strength to stand up for myself. My relationship with Elinor transformed. We were no longer connected by her son, but by a shared experience and mutual respect. She was my rock through the legal proceedings and the emotional fallout. We continued our weekend gardening, finding a peaceful rhythm in the simple act of nurturing life. We had, in a strange way, built a new family from the ashes of the old one. She had lost a son, but she had solidified her bond with a daughter. And I, having lost the man I thought I loved, had gained a true, lifelong mother figure. One afternoon, months later, as we were planting new roses, she looked at me, her eyes clear and content. "You know," she said, "I don't regret what we did. It was a terrible, painful thing. But truth, no matter how harsh, is always better than a beautiful lie." I knew exactly what she meant. Our revenge wasn't about destruction for its own sake. It was about a controlled demolition. It was about tearing down a structure built on lies so that something real and something true could finally have a chance to grow in its place. It's been over a year now since that fateful birthday party. The echoes of that night have faded, replaced by the peaceful hum of a new life, one I built for myself on my own terms. I moved to a small apartment in a different part of the city, a place that held no memories of him. I poured my energy into my work, and my graphic design business has flourished. I have new friends, new routines, and a newfound sense of self-worth that isn't dependent on anyone else's approval. I don't know for sure what happened to Mark. I hear snippets through the grapevine. He moved to another state, trying to start over where no one knew his name or his history. Whether he has changed, whether he is capable of change, is not my concern anymore. I have released him from my life, and in doing so, I have set myself free. His story is his to live, mine is finally my own to write. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about what we did. If orchestrating his downfall was too cruel. My answer is always the same: we didn't destroy him. We simply held up a mirror and forced him to look at his own reflection. The life he had built was a house of cards, and all we did was provide the gentle breeze of truth that brought it all down. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's just about revealing what's already there. The greatest lesson I learned from all of this is about the nature of strength. I used to think strength was about enduring pain quietly, about forgiving and forgetting, about keeping the peace at all costs. But I was wrong. True strength is about drawing a line. It's about recognizing your own worth and refusing to let anyone devalue it. It's about fighting for the truth even when it's painful. And sometimes that strength comes from the most unexpected places. It comes from the quiet wisdom of a woman tending her roses, a woman who chose principle over blood and integrity over loyalty to a lie. Eleanor is and will always be one of the most important people in my life. Our bond is a testament to the idea that family isn't just about who you're related to, but about who shows up for you when your world falls apart. My life is not a grand, dramatic love story anymore. It's quieter, it's more peaceful, it's real. I find joy in simple things: the morning sun on my face, a good book, a meaningful conversation with a friend, and the satisfaction of my own accomplishments. My garden now is a metaphorical one. I've spent the last year carefully pulling out the weeds of doubt, insecurity, and pain that Mark planted. I've been tilling the soil of my own soul, nurturing my own growth. And now finally, new things are starting to bloom, things that are strong, beautiful, and entirely my own. The betrayal almost broke me, but in the end, it was the catalyst for my rebirth. And I wouldn't trade the person I am today for the naive girl I was, living in that picture-perfect lie. The truth set me free, and for that I am eternally grateful.